Hello students, welcome to another session. Today we're going to talk about the narrative essay that you will have due on Friday, June 7th of this week. I want to talk to you specifically about the assignment and in general about narrative essays. This assignment calls for a topic which you'll see in the narrative essay assignment sheet in this week's folder. It specifically asks for the topic of selecting a childhood experience that had a great impact on you. Remember that in the story Salvation, Langston Hughes had a very traumatic experience at church, and he wrote about it as an adult. And you could see that he had many details, many sensory details that he described how this experience impacted him on a very personal level. You will also choose a topic, in this case, an incident that happened to you while you were a child. Remember that there are some things that you can to make it more interesting for the reader. In the story Salvation, Langston Hughes describes that night in the church. It only takes a couple hours for him to describe the scenes. You should do the same by choosing an event or incident during your childhood that had a great impact. Try to keep the time to at most a day or even hours. Why? Because then it makes your story more intense. This also allows for you to focus on the details, using sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch to describe those details. Many of you started this with your narrative paragraphs, and you did quite well. But I want you now to expand to an essay format. Let me talk to you in general about the narrative essay, and then I'll come back again to the assignment. A narrative essay offers the opportunity to think and write about ourselves, to explain how our experiences lead to some important realization or conclusion about our lives or about the world in general. Your purpose is not merely to tell an interesting story, but to illustrate to your readers the importance and influence the experience has had on you. With Salvation, we can see that Langston Hughes wanted to tell about this incident as a boy because it had a great impact, and he wanted to convey that experience to his readers. You should think about that incident or event in your childhood that has deep meaning not only for you, but can have deep meaning for the readers. There's some qualities that a good narrative story possesses. A good narrative essay involves the reader in the story. It is more interesting to create an incident for readers than to simply tell about it. So here again, Langston Hughes builds up to the climax of the story, of his narrative. And that climax is the time where he is asked whether he is going up to the altar to be saved. So you should also build some of those details and that scene in a way so that it captures the reader's attention. Another quality of a good narrative essay is telling the story in a sequence. The scenes are set at actual times and places. And it also includes detailed observations of people, places, and events. So some of you in your narrative paragraphs gave names of streets, of names of people, or even times. That's very important in order to be able to make the story come alive for the reader. Another quality of an essay, a narrative essay, is that it represents important changes, contrasts, or conflicts. In other words, it focuses on connections between past events, people, and places, and present events, people, or places. The event that you will choose as part of your essay has to in some way make a connection with the present. And you can do so by focusing on those details and making sure that those details are concrete. Remember that the narrative essay also represents the writer's point of view. This is coming from you. So in many of your sentences, you will start with I. And that's okay in a narrative essay because it is personal. So just to summarize, a narrative essay is told from your point of view. It makes and supports a point, is filled with precise detail, uses vivid verbs, uses conflict and sequence as part of the story. It can use dialogue. Some of you use dialogue in your narrative paragraphs, and that was well done. Dialogue makes for a more interesting read. Why? Because dialogue captures the reader's attention. When we speak, most people listen. So using dialogue in your essay will also help you to capture the reader's attention and bring it to their, and make it more interesting for them. Let's talk about how you write the essay. The first thing to remember is that it tells a story. Bottom line, it's going to tell your story. The second important thing about a narrative essay is that the story should have a point. Usually in the final paragraph, the writer should come to an important conclusion about the experience that has just been described. Remember in Salvation that Langston, after the church experience, went home and went to sleep, or tried to go to sleep, and he cried in bed. And that's when we realize how much of an impact this particular incident at church had on him. The aunt thinks that the young Langston Hughes is crying tears of joy about being saved. But Langston, we know, because we know his thoughts, is not crying about that. And so here is where you have the point of the story. Other people might call it the lesson or the moral of the story. Every good narrative has one, and you should aim to do the same. Usually it revolves around a certain theme. When you start your essay, it will have an introduction. But this introduction sometimes just goes right into the event. And that's okay. Just make sure that in your final paragraph or your conclusion that you tell the reader what the point of this story is, or the lesson. This is important because you want to make sure that you leave the reader with that impression or that point that you've now narrated in your story. Remember that this is about something that happened. So you have to give sufficient details about the people, place, and events so that the reader gets a clear idea of how the author feels about them. Langston Hughes does a very good job of putting us next to him in that church. He paints vivid pictures for us, again, using all the senses to be able to place the reader with him. That's the sign, and that's a way to make a good narrative essay, is to be able to give concrete details. Don't just tell me that you're sad. Show me that you're sad. Describe tears, or describe a sad face, or even say something sad. That's showing rather than telling. If you show someone, that makes for a better narrative. Going back to that final paragraph, the author reflects on the larger meaning or importance of the experience described. So here, you want to make sure that you are expressing that main point to the story, of the story. Let's talk about organization. You might have an introduction. Usually that's how we start. Then you move on to the body paragraphs, and that's where you describe the event. Another aspect of writing the essay is that it should be lively and interesting. Again, engage the reader's interest by adding details or personal observations. Share personal thoughts, and this invites the reader into the author's world. It makes the story more personal. Again, Langston Hughes invites you into his world, but in particular invites you into that event. Make sure that your introduction grabs the reader's attention. It could start with dialogue, it could describe a certain place, anything that will grab that reader's attention. The body of the essay, again, should be chronological, just like in Langston Hughes' story, Salvation. It goes from one event to the other. Keep in mind, though, what the purpose of your story is, or what that point is towards the end. If you have to take out anything that you think is not relevant to that point, then do so. But be careful here that you don't leave out too much. You need to include the most important details. Remember, for this essay, we're looking at 3 typed pages, which is not much, considering that in many cases, some essays can run for many pages. Here, you're trying to compress a lot of details into 3 pages. You'll see that you're probably in your draft, which you're going to start this week, before your final draft, that you will come up maybe with more pages. That's okay. The drafting aspect of this is important. And just make sure that you are including all the most important details. Make sure in your conclusion that you end strongly. Again, making that point, but maybe referring to something that you had mentioned before. This makes for a stronger essay. So here is the outline. You have been given a topic. Start brainstorming which event, start thinking about which event you want to talk about. And then maybe quickly write down in an outline what that event is and what point do you want to make. Think about it this way. In Langston Hughes' Salvation, one of the points that he is making, or one of the things that he wants us to see, is that there was some sort of loss of innocence due to this event that he went through. So that the theme there is loss of innocence. And that is what perhaps the point that he's trying to make. So think about something that you can connect with other readers that they may have experienced that you can also explain in this event. Remember that when you draft, these are your initial thoughts about the event. So don't worry too much about grammar or punctuation. As you begin revising, you'll be able to rewrite and improve on that. But just remember to get your thoughts down on paper. Now, getting back to the specific assignment. Again, I'm looking for concrete details, use of the senses, choosing a very narrow time sequence. So if it's a couple hours for the event, that will work well for 3 pages. If it's something longer than that, that's different, okay? It's better to choose an event that perhaps took over a place of a couple hours rather than something that dragged on. You'll find yourself focusing more on those details and making sure that, that you're able to describe them. Good luck with this assignment, and I look forward to reading about your narrative essays and your events. Thank you.